It's Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs. Let's start the show with Lewis Tennant. Here we go. Guests and interviews that you're looking for with creators, innovators, and so much more. For all episodes and further info, verbalhighs.com is the place to go.
Welcome to Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs, a podcast podcasted from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. In this case, the introduction being recorded in my living quarters rather than in the spare room / studio / office / place where the vacuum cleaner is. I mentioned that to say the neighbours are probably thinking, the neighbour's talking to himself again. Kia ora, folks. A really, really lovely chat and episode awaits you. I did something a little bit different this episode. That was actually my guest Jason Rockpig Hall's idea, and this idea happened to coincide with just having purchased a very tidy Zoom H5, which is a high-end professional audio recorder. Sorry, the key part there is it's portable. Jason pivoted, as he tells it, from the music industry and scene, as well as many years at 95 BFM, to starting a family and fulfilling a childhood dream of becoming a truck driver. So the first third of this chat is live. Well, it's not live, is it? Because it's a podcast. Damn it. Was live yesterday. Which could be a week before if you're listening. Anyway, getting to the weeds here with time, is live from the cab of his Kenwood truck and trailer combination, in which he carts fuel around the North Island. And from the beginning of the show, back when I did breakfast radio many years ago, we used to have a feature called Who Are the People in Your Neighbourhood? And it was just where you interviewed a different person about their job each week. And I said from the outset, it's even in the description show blurb for this show going back 7-8 years, that, you know, I said in my words I wanted to get a butcher, baker and candlestick maker. I just think going out and chatting to experts in their field is really interesting. And in this case, I learned a lot about trucks, trucking, fuel movements. Jason's thoughts on the drivers of New Zealand was something probably all of us universally have thoughts about. And then we pivot, as you'll hear, into the longer part of the conversation being in the usual location. And it's a really honest, insightful and interesting chat from Jason about basically how he was kind of doing one thing for many years, started doing a whole new set of things in more recent years, but still loves all the same thing through all those years, if that makes sense. We have a very frank and honest discussion about something in New Zealand that's very prevalent. I don't want to, spoiler alert, but that is often seen as quite taboo and not talked about. A little clue for you there. Technical stuff. When you're on live radio, they say don't use technical terms. Don't break the illusion. Don't tour the Disneyland guests around the mechanical backstage of the rides. But I will say that my device that I record in the home studio part of this setup, unbeknownst to me, was firing these kind of, like, for those of you old enough to remember TV static, which is 99% of my listeners, I would assume, it's firing off these little moments of what sound like TV static in the midst of our conversation. So I've managed to edit most of them out, but I think from memory there might still be one or two. The reason I point that out is if you hear that, there's nothing wrong with your earbuds or your phone or your stereo system or your laptop or your PA system that you're blasting my podcast out to your neighbourhood. It is actually a internal glitch on what is otherwise normally a very highly produced show run by a professional. There's some RNZ Crunchy Gravel. Do you know about RNZ Crunchy Gravel? It's a Radio New Zealand trick in their documentaries. They love the walking on the crunchy gravel. Well, I unintentionally got some A-grade RNZ Crunchy Gravel before I entered Jason's truck, and we took a drive around the motorways of Auckland. Another technical glitch. I had a windsock for that microphone. It's a microphone Merkin. If you don't know Merkin, Google Merkin. It's a microphone Merkin. It's a windsock. You get bigger ones on TV sets that generally look like small woodland creatures. They often pop into the top of poorly framed shots. Anyway, so it's not on. So there was wind, but I managed to remove most of that. That's really getting into the weeds. Jason's truck's got 18 gears. The car I've had with the most gears had 5. Anyway, enjoyed this chat. Thank you to Jason. It was a great conversation, and I always say all the episodes and all the guests, they're all my babies, but occasionally some hit more with me than others in terms of, I figure that we're quite kindred spirits in a lot of ways, and I think that comes throughout our journey on the truck. And then our later conversation, like the show, Verbal Highs Podcast on Facebook, Verbal Highs on all your podcast providers. If you are on a podcast provider like Apple Podcasts that allows you to rate and or leave a comment, please do that. It hasn't happened for a while. It's really helpful. I always say it's cool half of the episodes. Verbal Highs on Elon Musk's mess of a thing. I do post new episodes up there, and Verbal Highs on Instagram, social media. It's all a mess, really, isn't it? You can also go to verbalhighs.com, and if you are interested in podcasting, or you are a podcaster from New Zealand, I run an event called the New Zealand Podcasting Summit, and the 3rd New Zealand Podcasting Summit, it's an annual event, will be happening on, all going well, touch wood, on glass, on Saturday, May the 11th, 2024. You can go to nzpodsummit.com, but the program for next year is not quite announced yet. A couple more meetings with people, and that'll be out in the next week or two.
This is Dr. Tennant's Verbal Highs.
So this is the most I've felt like a real journalist in my life.
On the, what are you calling it? On the out in the field.
Yeah, field recording. That's right. So what are we dealing with here?
What we got,
Jason?
This is a 2019 Kenworth T610 model.
Yeah.
The front part of it is the truck, or the tractor. It's what it's called, and it's towing a triple axle semi-tanker trailer. So if we look around, this is what they call a semi. I meant to look up exactly what it means by semi combination, but this next one next to us is 2 trailers connected, but it's called a B train, an A trailer and a B trailer, and they're connected by 2 pivot points, one at the tractor and one at the second trailer.
And are they akin to in Aussie when you get those road trains that are just multiple?
But in Australia they have more trailers. But if we look next door, I think, so down the end is what they call a truck and trailer.
Yeah.
A rigid truck.
Yeah.
With a trailer that's not connected, but so you see there's still one trailer and one truck connected.
I get it.
It's not a semi-combination like mine.
And because obviously yours is a tanker, is there a difference in what you carry if you're
Yes,
doing one of those compared
these
to...
ones here are general freight.
Yeah.
This solid body quad trailer is refrigerated, so that takes refrigerated goods, same with that one there.
Yeah.
But the curtain siders, which you see quite a lot of, which are these ones here, curtain sided obviously is what it is.
Yeah.
It's a curtain that can be undone and slid across. Most of the time it's palletised goods,
right,
but general freight stacked in there and tied down is what they take. So
I would assume that we're cutting fuel.
we are. Transliquid, who I work for.
Should we have a cigarette?
No, not only for 8 metres away.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah. Transliquid, who I work for, we cart fuel mainly.
Yeah.
A fleet of tankers. And the company also tows bitumen trailers as well, and other bitumen products.
Right.
And we've got some container trailers as well as part of the business. But what I do, and what I've done for the last 12 years, is haul fuel. So what I'll do is I'll get you in and out of the rain, and I'll do some pre-checks before we take off.
Safety checks?
Yeah. So when you're getting in, Lewis, just grab both handles if you can.
Okay.
And just watch your step.
This
Because
might
if you fall
require
out,
me to
there's
put
too many forms to fill out.
So, just have Jason performing some checks under the hood.
So what I've done there is a pre-check before we depart, and what I've done is lifted the bonnet and checked all the vital fluids, coolant level, oil level and condition, and had a bit of a glance over to make sure there's no obvious leaks and so on. Quite often these trucks are double shifted, so someone's used it the night or day before.
Yeah.
And it pays to, well, any good operator worth their salt will be doing a pre-check. It's a vital safety thing, and just general good operations for any kind of good operator. So
I was sat here while you're doing the safety checks feeling like a Make-A-Wish kid. I'm not sure how I felt about it.
yeah, so this is my baby. This is TLL31. I've had this truck since brand new.
Wow.
A few other people have driven it with me, but I'm now single shifted.
How many gears are we cycling through?
This has got an 18-speed, what they call a Road Ranger manual gearbox. It's what they call a constant mesh gearbox, so you have to match the engine speed with the gearbox speed to make the shifts. It takes a little bit of learning on how to do that.
Was that a bit of RNZ there?
It is, yes. Another guy brought this back from the mount where our company is based, where it had been serviced and so on, while I was not on it.
I think there's a bit more weight on your shoulders when you're transferring for fuel rather than watermelons, right?
There is, but you also we are heavily trained to do that, and that's part of what I do and have been doing the last couple of years as well, is train in the systems, and the loading and the unloading of it is pretty specific and has to be it's very procedure driven and safety driven. So when I was at FluidX, I did a lot of very dangerous chemicals, a lot of food grade stuff, wine and chocolate and food grade oils and so on, but a lot of very, very dangerous chemicals. That
Liquid chocolate?
Yeah, it was one of my first proper tanker jobs, was running liquid chocolate between Cadbury and
That's wild.
Avondale.
Do you have to keep it turning like a concrete mixer?
No, but it goes in warm. It goes in warm.
If you hit the frost, you can't get it back out of the tank.
So this is going to beep for a second. I'm just going to check the lights. I'll be right back.
That whole American versus British thing, do you say route or route?
Route.
Yeah. So do you do the same route every time?
No, I don't.
I'm talking about your trucking life here.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, do at home, but out on the road, there's a fair amount of variety. Like, for instance, last week, Monday, I went up north, top of the island pie here and back, and mucked around up there. The next day, I went to King Country, and after being there, I went over to Bay of Plenty and then came back to Auckland.
Oh, of course, because you're distributing. I only thought about the filling and Tauranga and stuff.
Well, the filling either happens... No, we'll drive past the main oil terminal here in Auckland, where oil services, just for you to see it.
I'll stop asking questions so you can actually get on the road.
We'll just get out of here. And, if anything happens that I need to take action on, just follow my lead, alright? Yep. Nothing will, but alright,
sure.
Follow my lead.
It's like airline travel, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, just follow my lead.
See, it's still got a CB radio in this day and age.
It has, yeah.
Do you say rubber ducky?
No, none of that. I tend to turn it off in the city because there's a lot of bullshit being spoken about, but at night or early hours of the morning, if you've got a oversize coming at you, which invariably happens, a house moving or something on the road, someone else can warn you about that. So you're saying you haven't been in a big rig for a while, and you might have hitched back in the 1980s?
Not 80s, mate. I'm not that old. I think we hitched. I did a lot of hitching in 93, 94. I had Guns N' Roses to attend to.
Right.
I had Metallica to attend to.
Yeah.
I had the first big day out to attend to.
Yeah.
I realised I was only 16 back then. Maybe it's just a different era. I was hitching up to Auckland. Yeah, 16. But obviously nothing like this. I can't even remember what the guy that picked us up hauled, but I do remember a truck. He had a little boudoir in the back.
Right, yes.
It's one of those drivers.
Yep.
What's your shift work like? Are you sort of X amount of days on, off? Or?
I work 5 days in a row, Monday through Friday, which is not common. Most guys do it 1 day of the weekend, but there's all sorts of different combinations of how people do it. Different roster patterns and different. Some people are away for weeks at a time, or 2 weeks at a time, or all week, and living in their sleeper cab.
Right.
This truck is what they call a conventional day cab. There's no sleeping arrangements.
Also, wouldn't those guys tend to be more owner-operators as well?
Not always. Sometimes they're company trucks. Sometimes they are owner-operators.
Yeah. Big investments, eh?
Yeah, they're floaters. They float around the country or spend the week getting to the bottom of the South Island and then working their way back up to the North Island over a period of a week or 2 weeks or however, or they might just be floating New Zealand in general and going wherever their dispatch requires them to go.
So it's the owner-operator thing, like it's just like anything else. It's like you launch into a business, and if it's successful, you make more money than if you're working for someone else.
Yeah, there's differing ways to do it, but if I bought this combination, I would have to get a contract to...
Yeah, there's a lot
for continual work, but the onus is on you for repairs and maintenance out of your profit from that contract, so there's a lot to it.
Did your boss start off with one and then kind of build
Yes, he did, one or two, or he was an owner-operator for many, many years, and then he got a contract for fuel delivery and had to go to the bank manager and say, this is what I wanted to do, and now the fleet's 46 or something like that, 44,
Wow, that's a lot of investment, man.
Well, it is.
Looking at this truck, it'll be worth...
brand new, like truck and tanker combination, you don't get much change out of $1 million.
Yeah, okay.
Pretty high spec and had quite a bit of money invested in making them look good and have the equipment they need to do what they need to do,
So what have you learned while being out on the road, Jason?
Well, I had to learn how to do this altogether, so learning how to drive the machine correctly, and I'm constantly trying to, even after 15 years in the game, trying to constantly make sure I'm operating it in a way that is efficient and safe and the way it's supposed to be. It is what it is. I think driving has become... Well, it's such a privilege, and a lot of people don't understand the consequences of their actions of having a machine at their fingertips. And I'm not just saying trucks, I'm meaning motor vehicles in general. So
it's a pretty easy.
You know what I mean. And the disposable nature of everything means, and societal disregard for damage and all of that. So I'm just going to pause a bit. So if you look across to the right, you see all the big tanks there?
Yeah.
That is Auckland's loading terminal for the fuel.
And that's ready to go refined petrol.
It is.
Yeah.
There used to be a refinery at Marsden Point, and it's now become a storage terminal only. It's a bit of a bone of contention.
So where's it refined now?
It's refined around the world. A lot of it comes out of Singapore, but it's not the only place it does. Some in Australia, but it was a piece of infrastructure that a lot of people, including myself, probably shouldn't have been downgraded to just a refinery, because we're now bound by supply issues. And
let's hope bloody Winston and Chris fix that, eh?
Well, it's a wider political debate, and there's reasons for it, and I'm not averse to green concepts and all of that, but the previous government, and I'm not taking any sides at all, but the Labour Greens kind of forced the people, the stakeholders in that facility, to think that it's not going to be viable to refine product here in New Zealand. Yeah.
So what have you learned about New Zealand driving around?
Well, it's an absolutely beautiful place, and one of the things I love about driving in general is that I get to see this amazing place and meet a lot of different people and see New Zealand how it really is. You know what I mean? You delivering fuel to service stations and commercial customers. You meet people on the ground, and service stations are a melting pot of humanity if ever there was one. You know what I mean? So you see a lot of everyone and meet a lot of everyone, and people want to talk to you and people don't, and you see a lot of shit, for good or ill. And
more thinking time than before you started
trucking? Hell of a lot. I solve any problems that we're having at home, and there's not a lot, but the day-to-day life issues that we all face.
Well, I think
sometimes need a day or two pondering, and I can go back to my wife and say, how about we look at it this way, or whatever it may be,
And the time with family life, like your roster is good for
it is
a family man, because I'm sure there's been many truckers who were trying to get away from their families and doing, the old school dad.
I've been lucky, and I was taught by a couple of older, like 70-year-olds, and they said, you got it good, boy.
Yeah.
And some of them have been on their second or third marriage because they've been away so much. They didn't get to see their kids being raised.
Well, that's why I brought up Australia, because the extremity is so much more over there, right?
Yeah, it is.
In terms of how long you might go out.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a friend that's a week on shift and a week at home, you know, and there's differing styles of, you can do 2 weeks up in the mines and and then 1 week off, or 3 or 1. There's all sorts of different lifestyle choices you need to make, but you need to have a very forgiving partner or understanding partner, and that wouldn't suit me. Those sorts of things. So I'm home every night, but I start at 1 o'clock in the morning. So
how have you even adjusted? When do you go to bed?
Well, I go to bed at 7 o'clock. That's what I have to do. A lot of people say, "How do you do it?" And I'm really only getting 5 or 6 hours a night.
And then does your body, can you sleep in and adjust the days you're off?
I do, but I don't. Like this morning and yesterday morning, I was kind of up 7, 8 o'clock.
So you're jet lagged all the time?
A little bit, but
you DJ'd for years, which is really good training.
But it's funny because I probably, even though I didn't get a lot of sleep in those days, I probably get less doing this, but I managed to fatigue in a different way, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what it's about, and what our industry...
Probably helps when you're not smoking darts and drinking.
Oh, all of that, yeah.
Favourite roads?
Well, I like being up north, but the roads, and you know, it's common knowledge that the roads are very, very poorly maintained up there. It needs a lot of resource thrown at it, and they don't have it up there. They don't. It's resources allocated on a per capita basis and rates and all of that, and local governments across the country will probably tell you the same thing, is they've only got a certain slice of pie to deal with, and other social infrastructure situations that need those resources thrown at them. So the roads get X, and that's all they get. And
what was that?
That's a light lane departure warning. So I should have indicated then. If I had the indicator on, it would have...
If your boss is listening, he indicated.
I also think roading technology and road surface technology has come a long way, and it's not being matched at the ground level. We're still repairing roads like it's 1976, and the same methods that have been handed down since then, and they just deteriorate rapidly. Some would say, it's all the trucks on the road, and that's right, there is a lot of that happening, but like I say, road surface technology and...
Are you saying that globally there's much more modern ways to do it that New Zealand's not doing? That's so interesting.
Yeah, surface technology. And up here, the road, the undersurface is different. Like down in the South Island, the roads hold up a little bit better because of the shale. You know, shale base or whatever is a little bit harder. You know, so
what would you tell other motorists on the road in terms of interacting and negotiating with trucks? What do people do and don't do?
A lot of...
How's that biker?
Well, yeah, I mean, he's... Like, I'm constantly... I tell my wife I'm like the Terminator. I'm looking 200 metres ahead, and I'm watching mirrors all the time and so on. But following distance is a big one. Being aware that although the trucks are very modern and very well safely appointed and have big disc brakes and like you just heard, that lane departure technology, this truck is fitted with active cruise braking like a lot of modern vehicles. So if I got too close to that truck in front of us, it would start braking for me if I thought I was going to.
But I think the point you were getting to is it's still hard to stop, would be my guess.
It is. It's harder to stop. So if you and you see a lot of people wanting to be in front of the truck all the time. Like we are slower by default. We have to be slower due to the speed limit set for us, but because we're heavy, a lot of the time we are going slower, or we're just taking it a little bit easier, so we've got a better chance of manoeuvring like we want to. But
a lot of Kiwis love doing that alpha male overtaking.
Yes, they do. Or people are scared. You see a lot of people timid of it, and that's understandable. It's the size and they just don't want to be behind the truck. But what they'll do is they'll get in front of you and then brake hard. They're in front of you now. They've made their move, and they just begin to hold you up. So keeping with the flow of traffic, and this comes back to what I was talking about driving habits. I think there's a lot of poor driving that goes on here in New Zealand, a lot of aggressive driving that goes on here in New Zealand. It's the alpha male thing, but it's also a societal thing where everyone has to be in front and you're in my way, and how dare you delay me for 20 seconds.
I've got a regional one for you, man. Aucklanders don't indicate.
Well,
and I'm a cyclist,
yes,
so I'm very aware of that.
They indicate very poorly. They'll indicate for 1 second, and also make their move, just like the mere fact that their indicator is on says that they can come across.
I never judge my next move on my cycle based on indicators these days.
Another big thing, and it's just a societal thing, is everyone is on their phone. Like, they can't leave that alone, and I'm addicted to my phone as much as anyone, but when I'm in here, it stays there, and I don't deal with it. But if you look out, you'll probably see a lot of people with their phone in their hand or in their lap. And so
I see it all the time, because again, I'm a pedestrian and a cyclist.
Yes.
I often feel like taking photos of them, but hey. Hey, and that thing you did with RNZ a few years ago was basically the angle for Sam was truckers and their music.
Yeah.
Is music still a big part of your life?
It is. I listen to it a lot. I mean, I listen to a lot of pods.
I was going to say, I was going to gently ease that in. They say that's how Rogan became so successful, is these sorts of jobs. It lends itself to 3 hours of talking,
right?
Yeah,
so I've got a palette of 5 or 6 continuous ones I turn over, and if I get turned on to something new, I add that into the mix. But when I get sick of the talking, I listen to whatever album I feel like that day.
Soundgarden's still a strong contender?
I'm still a Rockpig, you know what I mean? But I've also got a broad, as you know, a broad palette. So whatever I feel like, really, you know.
Yeah.
But pods take up most of it, and sometimes I just have nothing on, and I listen to my own thoughts or absorb the country, you know. So but mainly pods these days, you know. I haven't got into the audio book yet.
No, I need it. But
it's
you know what?
It's on the fringe.
But you know what? Like, even speaking of RNZ, like even from when I was a kid, I've always found people reading out. I've always found like audio dramas kind of tweet to listen to. They're not really my jam, so I get it.
I don't know what it is about talking that is different from music. That is so absorbing while driving. You know, I really don't know what that is. You might have a night.
Hang on, wait, hang on.
You know what I mean? Like talking seems to be more attractive to me. Listening to talking seems to be more attractive to me while I'm driving. I
know what that is. We're middle-aged now. And I remember my grandfather when I was a kid, the transistor in the corner. I was like, fuck, I'm never going to become like that. It's just
my grandfather
music
was
will
the same.
die. Yeah.
And his chair with it to his ear, you know, listening to the national program. But
jump in the cab of a 20-year younger driver, and you probably turn it on. It'll be very loud.
It's banging trap, probably.
Well, I'm just going to take in the road for the last little while. Feels like we're coming back, going past Spookers.
Yeah. I'll get off at some stage and we'll turn around and we'll head back.
When you said a short drive, I thought you meant way shorter than this.
Right.
That's why I said I thought you were going to take me around the block like a Make-A-Wish kid.
I kind of was, but I wanted to give it a bit of length.
Right, we're back on the record again, mate.
Yeah, okay. We'll keep it
Talk to me about some trucking etiquette.
Well, it's not... We always wave at each other. The majority of us wave at each other out on the road. If someone is stopped in the middle of the night in a bit of an odd position, I'd be tempted to call up or possibly stop and just make sure they're all right. You know, there's a lot of us older guys a lot older than us, or people a lot older than us, that are still doing it. That, you know, medical events are not uncommon. You know, so if someone's not feeling the best and can't say anything to anyone, or in the middle of the night you don't see many people, so you know there's a bit of that. If you're old school, you make sure everyone's all right. You know,
I talked to you about when the big hairy man in the singlet picked me and my mate up. Took us about good, probably quarter of the way up Wellington to Auckland. That wouldn't be allowed these days, I'm guessing, picking up the truckers?
No, I had to have permission for you to do this today.
What if you're an owner-operator? Is that up to you?
That's up to you. It's your health and safety rules, but I couldn't take you into the terminal or go and do loads is basically not allowed, you know?
Yeah.
So to do this today, I've got a standing within the company and my level of operations that I'm going to behave accordingly, and you are informed on the whys and wheres and what nots to, how to handle yourself and so on.
It was cool. It was good seeing that you could do a donut though while the mic was off. It was, I just didn't know a vehicle this big could do that.
Not everyone's got that skill.
Right. You ever tempted to stick a garden hose in there and fill up your car?
No.
So audio is theatre of the mind. I'll just tell the listeners we're pulling back into
yard area.
Yard area of. What's the company called?
This company is Fitchits, is where we've hired some space to park our trucks.
And Jason is going to try and back this truck in, and I'm going to colour commentate / trash talk. That yellow truck is very Where's Wally.
It is, yeah, that's the old supermarket truck. That one goes in and out of supermarkets.
Yeah.
Foodstuffs is yellow. So it's all about angles, really, Lewis, and obviously I'm in the back corner there and I've got to get the truck...
Same basic angular principles as backing a trailer on a car, I'm guessing?
Yes, it is. You're kind of working in opposites.
Yeah.
And you're just kind of working in smaller increments, you know.
Yeah. And did we cycle through all of the gears as we?
We went through most of them. Yeah, we were empty, so we didn't really need to loaded uphill.
Yes.
You would have seen it really in action.
Yeah.
And how the full gearbox operates. So what I'll do now is I'll pull forward and straighten up through that gate and just get my angle right.
And you're not a tongue out the mouth guy when you concentrate, I notice.
I'm sure I've got a bit of fucking eye movement going on.
Right, so masterfully done. We are straight on to go back in.
But it's 60 feet. You basically got 60 feet of gear to deal with, you know, and it takes a little bit of getting used to where the corners are. And lots of relying on those mirrors.
And you clean your own...
I do. I tend to, like you can see in here, it's immaculate. I keep it like that.
Yeah.
And the outside we wash once a week.
Thanks, buddy.
No worries.
Let's retire to the recording studio.
Okay, cool.
/ my dining room.
Verbal high straight down from up above.
So this is a weird one. We're going to start this episode already having talked, for about an hour?
Go backwards.
Intimately? Quite intimately.
Backwards in time.
For two men who don't know each other that well, we got quite intimate.
But we've known each other a long time,
Yeah.
just not that intimately.
And I went inside your cab. That was quite intimate.
Yeah, it's not many people get to do that.
Yeah, I suppose not many people do get to do that,
What did you think of your little ride?
It was great. And like I heard you say when you did that piece for RNZ, it is kind of every little boy's, we can say every little child, I think it's still every little boy in particular's kind of dream to go into machinery like that.
It is, and it was always, I still love trucks just as much as I did back then, you know. And not too long ago I found or got sent some family photos from a little boy, and I had, it was holding up a truck jigsaw, you know, wearing a truck T-shirt,
Yeah.
you know, so it's just always been there, you know.
Are your family petrol heads?
Yes they are, and had family involvement in trucking before I was born and as I grew up, but I didn't pursue it back then.
But no racing or stock cars?
Yes, rally driving, and uncle that was a petrol head the whole way through. My grandfather had motorcycles, my dad had motorcycles, and mum always loved cars, hot cars and fat cars and so on. So yeah, it's in the blood.
So if we go kind of like, let's go... What we call it, BB, which is like before B.
Yeah.
See what I did there?
Yeah.
So before B. Well, where did you grow up? Are you an Auckland boy through and through?
Grew up born and raised in South Auckland, born in Papakura, and grew up in Manarewa until I was 10. My parents had split, and the man my mother remarried moved us out to Hunua, so still in South Auckland, and then on to Bombay after that until I left school and home at 16 and moved back into town. So that kind of covers that. Early focus was definitely South Auckland. Went to school in Papakura, Rosehill College.
And I always carbon date my guests, and I think you told me you're basically going to turn 50 soon, aren't you?
That's correct, yeah. 49. I turned 49 this year, so
you
50
you got a solid foot of youth in the 80s and the 90s.
I did, yeah.
What a great place to
70s,
be.
80s, 90s, yes. And,
you would remember I suppose you'd remember the 70s, so what, you're 74?
I do just, but you know what I mean? Like, you know, 80s is the prime.
Is there a photo of you in a T-shirt with that coloured ribbing on the sleeves and stubbies?
Yes, there is.
And
Yes,
stubbies?
there is.
Great,
Yeah.
okay.
Of course there is.
Yeah.
You know, that faded kind of, Yep.
And school photos where we all looked like we got hand-me-downs and there wasn't a lot of labels and so on in New Zealand.
Yeah.
It's coming out of the Muldoonians, bro.
Yeah, we were very much a hand-me-downs family, and we weren't we were middling there, and we had everything we needed, but there was the reuse of clothing items for sure.
I always corduroy. I had a sense of fashion that I couldn't achieve like quite young, and so corduroy always I found very painful. I had to wear a lot of corduroy. Do you remember corduroy pants?
I do. I know. I desire them again. Funnily enough, where do you get a good pair of men's corduroy trousers these days? Because that's what I want.
Well, I know a guy who does he wrote that Shit Towns in New Zealand thing, and when he does media, he wears classic old New Zealand like bloke attire, like the. That was so funny, suit, that series. The suit with the...
Yes, with the walk socks and the sandals.
And he is actually... I'd have to go back through my messages. He said there's actually still a company in and around Onehunga who sells all of that stuff, but when you go in, you can't let the guy know that you're being ironic.
Right, you're deadly serious about what you're doing.
So you left school at 16. Was that finishing what we called seventh form then, or were you like, nah, out of here?
That
really?
Was fifth form, and I didn't do great at school. I wasn't a miserable failure, but and in that era, you could still go out and get a trade or there was jobs available if you wanted to work, and I just didn't do that great at school. And Mum recognised that, and she said, you can leave school, but you've got to get a job. You can't fuck around and get on the dole like some of my peers were doing, and just cruising and as you could do in those days. I don't know how easy it is to cruise on a benefit these days, and I really don't know. But you hear that it happens, but I'm not sure that it's that easy to do. But in those days, you could get on the dole.
More hoops to jump through.
You could get on the dole and you could cruise for a year or two or whatever in between jobs if you wanted to. And I wasn't allowed to do that. Mum said, you can leave school, but you've got to get a job. So I got one straight away. And the first job I had for a few years was working in a steel factory that manufactured tow bars and bull bars. And I got that through a neighbour who I'd mowed his lawns for my teenage years, and I'd done such a good job at that. I was always pretty meticulous with my work ethic and punctuality and the job I did. And he said, if you ever need a job, I'll give you one.
Yeah.
And I took him up on it. Well, my mum sent me up to him and said, Mike Parker was his name, and I said, I need a job, and he says, well, you start on Monday. And,
awesome.
And he took me in, and my initial role there was cutting bits of steel and putting holes in bits of steel and cutting the corners off bits of steel and then bending them into the right shape and fitting them up to a jig, and then they went on to a welder and got made into a product.
But a good team of guys who took
it was a wonderful.
Yeah,
it was absolutely wonderful. Well, I'd grown up with everyone around in the places that I'd grown up in school. School out in South Auckland was very multicultural and so on, but the workplace was even more so. And my head and life wasn't expanded as fully as it was going to get, but it opened my eyes up. You grow up pretty quickly when you leave home and get a job at 16 because you're in the workforce and you're either doing it or you're not. And, you got the fuck on with it, and you didn't complain too much because you either liked it or lumped it, you know what I mean? So I learnt pretty quickly, and I ended up custom making, learning how to weld, and ended up custom making and fitting those products for vehicles for that company. And then in the very latter stages, went into the front office and was taking orders and selling front of house those products to whoever needed them, car dealers or whatever around the country. And that is when I got my first job at BFM.
My story is I was just an avid listener for ages, and then I went up and said, hey, can I get involved?
And that's exactly it. I'd been a listener since late high school. My friends discovered it, and I discovered it. I was scrolling through the stations one day on one of my weekend visits to my father. We saw him every second weekend, and I was scrolling through the radio stations on my little transistor, and Metallica's Fight Fire with Fire come bursting out of the speakers, and I was like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah, you don't hear that on the radio.
That's right. And it was BFM, you know, and I became an avid listener, and the things that drew me in were the hard, fast and heavy show because I was a metal kid. But also Marcus Lush was doing the talkback at that time, and funnily enough, the World Show with Ross Clark and Pim Gorda was just something different, you know, Mongolian throat singing and whatnot. Well, I never fucking heard anything like it, you know what I mean? So my musical tastes were broadened at that time, and I very much became a listener. But how I got involved with it on a volunteer level was we were fraternising with a guy whose sister lived in a place in Freeman's Bay where
that word fraternising is so you are being you're being deliberately very.
Well, I'm just trying to in a broad kind of
brushstroke.
But anyway, his sister, where we would go and hang out. His sister lived with Renee Jones and a guy called Justin Reading, and it was an old school BFM house, punk house, covered in these posters from the 80s of gigs that just looked absolutely out of this world of alternative bands and shows and concepts that were like, wow. And they were volunteers at BFM and doing shows already, and basically opened the door enough for me to sneak in and guided me into becoming a volunteer.
Yeah.
And, getting graveyard shows and doing that.
There was a well-known DJ in Wellington for years, Clint Smiley, and one of his quotes was like, I was a classless wanker from the suburbs, and then what he was trying to say was like...
He never pulled in many punches that old Clint.
What he was saying was that his mind was... He hadn't heard and seen a whole lot of things that he discovered through things like when he got involved with campus radio, in this case Active. It's when it broadens, like, you could have stuck in that one lane of music for years, but you find something like there and all these doors open, right?
Yeah. Well, I became a volunteer, and I was active on the weekends and when I could, doing what volunteers do. Very active volunteer, very good volunteer, hard-working volunteer that, didn't ask for much and just got on with it, just to be involved, just to be there. And I ended up getting some graveyard shows. You had to submit a cassette tape.
Yeah.
Graham Hill was the man in charge at that time. He was doing breakfast and kind of running the programming side of it. But you had to submit a tape to him. And I don't know whether he ever listened to it in real life or not. I've never asked him. But I got graveyard shows out of that. And a job came up as promotions assistant to Psych Off. Simon Coffey, lovely man, still out there today. I think he's teaching actually what he does now, but he was promotions manager at the time, and a promotions assistant position came up, and I went for that, and I got it. Adam Hyde was station manager at that time, and him at Psych Off gave me the job. But
where are we? Early 90s?
Yes, and that was assisting him in all the events and manufacturing and merch and all of that, but you only got paid 10% of the profit on the B card and any merch sold at that time.
Right.
And at times that was nothing.
Yeah.
And I mean that was nothing. So I left my job at Best Bars, which was a reasonably paid full-time job. My mother must have nearly had a heart attack.
It was a sensible suburban job. Yeah.
And just thought, okay, this is what you're doing now. But I was determined to pursue it.
But then back then compared to now, when you've got kids and a wife and a house, like you've just got to like afford to keep food.
That's
and
right.
Keep yourself alive and sheltered.
Yes, very much. We were my friends and I were living in a warehouse in Manukau, not far from where we were today, where we parked that truck that we'd built up into a living quarters and all of that. So that was fairly cheap. Rent and whatnot, and expenses were day to day weren't that much, but at times I wasn't making anything, so that job didn't last very long because I just couldn't sustain it, and I ended up washing cars for a lease and rental company for one summer with my shirt off, which was fantastic. I had a good time, but not long after that, working for a car dealer, who was an absolutely horrible human being, a job came up at Real Groovy, and that's when I went there.
Oh my God, so did you work there for years, Real Groovy?
I did a few years there. Well, I think it was at least 5 in the trenches, we'd call it in those days. But
you were often on the buy and sell.
I did
vinyl.
End up there. What happened was I started in the real trenches. I don't know whether you remember the old 438 Queen Street had kind of a trench set up where you were elevated as you looked up to the people that you bought off. And you ran.
Yes.
There was a kind of a row where you went back to get the CDs out of the drawers, which was popular at the time. Kids, you might not realise that, but CDs were the king for a while there. Yeah. And I did very well on that front counter, but I got asked to be in the vinyl department, which was the flavour I was... I'd always been a record buyer and whatnot, so I jumped at that chance and basically learnt the art of trading secondhand.
You had me realise there's so many staff on the floor there, especially in its heyday.
Yeah.
Like,
High turnover.
it must be a pecking order. Like, you don't just go, hey, when you go for your job interview, I want to do vinyl selling and
No,
trading.
you can't get
like,
that.
You've got to work your way up the pecking order, don't you?
Yes, that's right. But I because of what I did, I was DJing. I began DJing during that era. So, and I had an idea of what things were.
I think it's great. All of the world's just completely flipped on its head since back then, media wise and everything else. Digital, analog, all of that. Like, good on Real Groove for fucking surviving and sticking. And their new spot is awesome.
Yes,
it's above.
I've been down there a couple of times.
Yeah, so it's inviting more people in who don't normally see it. I'm not, as we talked about in the truck, I'm not a big buyer of kind of a lot of anything in that store these days.
No,
but I think it's really clever how they haven't, like, what I used to notice with a lot of other, particularly like secondhand vinyl stores, is you've got some old guy who's totally stuck in his ways and doesn't adapt.
Yes,
and the way that they've survived is that they sell like cool little kind of knickknacks and collectibles, and then all around the world, teenagers have got into vinyl again.
Yes, well, I've survived that cyclic thing many times over, and it's been in many different places, and it was 2 or 3 before where it was 438, but it's survived that vinyl is back kind of thing many times over.
So pre-internet, particularly with dance music, which is often notoriously kind of underlabeled, or isn't a big mainstream release like a Smashing Pumpkins album or whatever. How do you know what to give people for what they're bringing in? How would you approach that? And were there sort of like, was it trial and error sometimes? You paid out too much? It
was, and there was other people that did it as well, and they relied on lists and, music label lists and so on, and they were skilled in looking at those at magazine charts and all of that. There was a plethora of tools that they used to do that, but a lot of it was hit and miss, and just by label or whatever, and they bought not as many copies and see how it sold, and then
I was meaning when people come in with second-hand stuff.
The way we did that was buying second-hand music. I mean, the majority of it was rubbish that people brought in. You know what I mean, and you recognised that. It was a lot of households had the same pile of shit, you know what I mean, and so you turned away a hell of a lot. But
Kamal records,
all of that, and and it's not a bad record by any means, but Split Enz' True Colours, Fleetwood Mac's Rumours, all of that, everyone had a copy. Everyone had a copy
Thriller,
of it, and they would bring it in.
And
the New Zealand pressed Beatles records and all of that, and everyone thought they had $1 million worth of records, but a lot of it was just ready for the bin, really.
I remember once, fairly recently, compared to when I was doing all that stuff a lot, so since I've lived back in New Zealand, I took a bunch of records into Groovy, and they said, no, we don't want any of them. And I said, oh, look, to be honest, I'll probably just bin them. And the guy actually said, can you please not put them in a public bin around here, or someone else will turn up with them again, bring them back again. Yeah.
Well, you broke a lot of people's hearts because they thought they had a gold mine,
right.
You know what I mean? And you had to be, I was always very straight up and very nice about it, but you had to say, unfortunately, this is just a pretty common...
Although we're long enough away now, and that was 20 years ago, whatever, 15 years ago, that some of those records are actually collectible again because first presses of
all of that, and Groovy has a wonderful database of how things have sold, and I got taught quite a bit by Brett Haddock, who I believe is still there, who was a master of that department and knew what was rare and collectible. So I learnt a few things along the way about what to look for and so on.
So you bought and sold all vinyl, not just the dance stuff, because they used to go, you get that guy to come over because he knows that.
So you could look on a database and see how things had sold, and then go, well, we don't really need that, or it hasn't really sold, or if you didn't know.
A little bit more on this with the DJ stuff. I'd imagine that your advantage is being in the scene and knowing the customers, so when stuff comes in, you can go, well, I know that Phil Bell comes in 3 times a week and he'll snap that up, and I know that Jim's after that stuff, so I'll snap that up.
Or someone like Greg Churchill would come in and sell bits and pieces, you know.
Sorry, we're getting lost in translation again. I'm meaning you're buying from Joe Punter, who doesn't DJ out, they play at home or whatever. You know the DJs who come in and what they buy. So you go, if I buy that, I know that he's going to come in.
I started to know the labels and the what it was and whether it was a quality product or not, and had a resale had a resale quality to it. You know?
That's the other last thing on this. The other clever thing they do there is they're not afraid to just cut their losses every now and again and just make everything $3. You know,
well, that's how they have to survive. Otherwise, you end up with $1 million worth of stock.
Yeah.
You know, and you have to turn it over. And their sales system, which I probably was a brainchild of Chris Hart, who is, I believe, still an owner or whatever. You know, they worked out a sales system like that slowly degraded it down and whatnot. You know, the sales.
That's what I'm saying. Compared to like when I did my PhD research, I had a bit of record shop stuff in it. One of the guys, Chris, I interviewed, who lives in the States now, does a lot, like kind of digs as a serious hobby, was like, yeah, you get those shops where it's like one owner, he's stuck in his ways, he won't discount anything that's been there for ages, and then Chris ended with like, and at the end you're not sure whether it's a business or a mental health issue.
Yeah, well they nearly went broke several times, including while I was working there, you know, because of it just constantly needed refining and the way the business operated, you know. And
so when did you get your first daytime show on B?
Well, when you worked there, when you got a job on staff, that qualified you for daytime shows.
Yeah.
So when I was promotions assistant, that automatically put me in the mix for a 1 to 4 or whatever. You know, it wasn't an official one, but then after having had that kind of been in that space, and people like Bill Curtin were helping running the show up there at that time. He was a big supporter of mine and saw a lot of potential in me, I guess. Thursday Drive came up. You know, this is a kind of succession of it. You know, Thursday Drive came up, and obviously proved myself to be handy and competent enough to do it. Then I got
Thursday Drive's got a good history of hosting.
It is, and it's a wonderful. You know, I went from there to Friday, and Friday was to me one of the king shows. You know what I mean? But Thursday, Thursday was good because it was nearly at the end of the week, and you could kind of put your foot down 3/4 of the way and go, come on, we're nearly there. We're nearly there, guys. Come on, and you bring people through to the end of the week. You know, and then Friday you bring it on home, baby. You know,
I've been out there for a few interviews with that guy Johnny. It's instantly connected with him. He's great.
He's a wonderful kid, and.
I don't think he'd call himself a kid.
Well, he wouldn't. He's a grown man with children, so
that's right.
It's fine. But I love him to death because he is one of the few now, and I don't expect much from that place anymore because it's evolved and revolved, and I walk in the door now and people don't know who I am. He does, and he is very respectful of the history that I had with that place and understands it and knows it.
Great.
You know, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I don't
expect it, but I appreciate it.
No, they're good. They're good words. Yeah.
He carries the can for, you know, and you don't have to have a hand in that history, but to know it and understand it I think is a good thing.
You just made me realise every time I've gone up for an interview, he mentions that I used to be on there, and he's very adamant about that.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
How those graveyard, just honestly, I look back and I was so lucky to do those. Obviously not at B, at Active, but just 6 hours in the case of Active, because I think it was 1 a.m. till 7 a.m.
Well, it was.
Left in sole charge of a radio station.
Yeah,
okay?
I think it's vital. It was vital for me because you get to make mistakes.
Because you find the terrible novelty record at 5 a.m. You play the terrible novelty record.
You fall asleep for a minute.
You let a caller on who wants to do poetry at 4:30 a.m. and you're just stoked that you've got a listener.
But did you ever meet Nat Man, the Tongan guy that used to be the king of the Friday night graveyard?
I'm not
he was
really an Aucklander.
He was the master of it, and another. Very big inspiration for me from those old BFM days because he had cassette tapes with his stings and everything on it, and he was extremely prepared for his graveyard. He was the master of it. All he wanted to do was graveyard. He had no desire to do any other, you know, people go up there and they want to do breakfast immediately. You know, I'm here now, I should be the breakfast host, but he never had any designs on that, but did the perfect graveyard for the graveyard slot, was extremely prepared, had multiple formats.
It rings a bell. You know? I think he might have been there when I was doing those slots to the Mikey Band-Aid slots.
Minimal talking, but important talking when it needed to happen. Wasn't full of himself and needed to hear his own voice all the time.
So what do you call your tenure there from about 93, 92 to...
I think I was involved for about 16 years, but I tried to write down the dates and the years, and I couldn't get it to bloody match up, you know what I mean? So, but I was there a long time. But I went back as music director / program director was when I went back for my second paid job there.
I think that's around when I was doing what I was doing there, eh?
And I'd been part-time at Real Groovy once I started to get to make music and DJ a lot, I deemed myself capable of going part-time at Real Groovy so that I could concentrate on doing the radio stuff and the production stuff and the DJ stuff and that. And Aaron Carson. And during that part-time phase, I'd been asked to go up and do some ad programming, like the ads had been produced and so on, and then they needed to be integrated into the playlist system through RCS.
Traffic management.
Yeah, and I did that for a while.
Yeah.
And that kind of enlightened me how the system works and all of that. And then Aaron Carson, who was station manager at the time, asked me if I wanted to be music director / program director, and I did. I jumped at the chance to do that. It suited me down to the ground at the time.
Oh, that's great. And did you have a particular what do you think your particular, what's the word, brush you applied to that? Oh, because obviously BFM plays such a range of music, but I think with that comes PDs are going to have some kind of a sound to what they do. Well, what did you want for the station when you were doing it?
Well, the thing is, Lewis, I have to be honest with myself. I had no real experience apart from being a
DJ. That's fine. That's student radio.
DJ, yeah.
That's what it's about.
I was flying by the seat of my pants, and you relied heavily on, and I would presume they still do, the breadth of people that are going up there to bring you music. There was artists bringing you music. There was record labels sending you new music. You were the internet wasn't a thing. It was only just starting to happen. So you were relying on the NMEs and the music, the Mojos, and all of that sort of stuff. But there was all the volunteers that were up there were all going, oh, have you checked this out and bring this in, and Stinky Jims and the
So where were you, PD? What years?
Well,
you were doing something up there when I was doing shows in 2009.
Yeah, that was music director, because what happened was...
keep talking. Yeah. I've left the security cameras on and I can hear my phone buzzing.
Can you? Is there a breach in security? Well, I think it was... and like I say, I wrote it all down, but I don't know what the accurate... but it must have been... late 90s that that happened, but I only really wanted to be music director, so that role was eventually split not long after I started that, and someone else took over the programming side of it, but I was still doing a lot of that stuff in conjunction with Aroha. Started as program director, Aroha Hardware, so that happened, but...
so you did that for about 10 years?
Yeah, no, it wasn't quite that long. It wasn't quite that long, but it was a few years. Yeah, it wasn't that long.
Because I did that Bricky thing in 2009, and you were both up there then.
Yes.
So you get stuck in these dates. Yeah, big question, but over 16 years, the ebbs and flows and highs and lows of B, what did you see it go through?
Well, the advent of the internet kind of having an effect on how things worked in terms of music sourcing and content and all of that came into play as I was there and leaving. So we had to grapple with that. It was always, it was in the post, and then all of a sudden it arrived. So, we were initially like, well, what's an MP3 and how's that going to affect the broadcast quality? So we were all wary of that initially, but a lot of people up there were early adopters and of sourcing music through websites and chat rooms and all of that, which was great, and we needed that. A lot of the younger people were instrumental in that, and also some of the older people, Stinky Jims and so on. They were, as you should have been. You can't fight against it. I was big on trying to understand it as best I could, and just kind of my thing was, as long as the quality's good and the music's there, then who cares what format it is? You know what I mean?
What about the people in the culture? Like, I feel like student radio anywhere with a large amount of volunteers is always going to be a really it's a full-on place for a lot of people, because it's a really key part of their lives. It's like often their formative years doing things. Some people are getting paid, some people aren't.
Yeah.
My point is, like, mid-late 90s, probably more mid to late 90s, there was a real period there where B was just unfuckwithable. Like, there was money coming in.
Yeah, we were flying.
You guys were like the darlings of old culture, and
Yeah, and I think it was because a lot of the mainstream were looking at it going, well, how do we get a tasted that. How do we do
and youth
that?
culture was becoming like really marketable.
Became the
So what I was getting at is like, because that's been talked about a lot. I feel like there'd be a tail end of that because things have got really hard, in the new media environment. But did you feel like the kind of wind coming out of the sails a bit?
A little bit, but I was also in that era where the wind was full. You know what I mean? So I was lucky to be in the kind of in that area while we worked in conjunction with the internet rather than being swallowed up by it and having it, like you unfortunately look at it now, and part of what's hurting BFM is that there's a whole lot more choice out there in terms of listening habits, but also the selling of advertising, which floats these organisations and keeps the heater on.
I'm just going to come out and say it. When I was there in 2009, it didn't feel like a very healthy or happy place to work. Discuss.
Well, who was in charge of it?
Well, it was before Manu came along.
Yeah. Who you remember who station manager was?
I think it was Helen.
Yes. So that was the turning point.
But I don't think she was a...
No, I don't think she was a bad person at all.
Otherwise I wouldn't...
Yeah, and I won't speak ill of anyone.
No,
but
that's not what I'm asking you to do.
The vibrations were definitely changing and...
Felt a bit rudderless. That's the word I use.
And when it works from the top down as well. So, and unfortunately... I want to be careful with my words here because it's nobody's fault, you know what I mean? And the environment was changing, but that is how it works, you know what I mean? So when the middle ground is kind of second-guessing the upper ground, then, the vibrations do change and so on, So
it was an odd... I'm just going to hijack your story with a bit of mine. That was an odd situation for me I've not talked about really on the podcast in depth before, in that... They brought me on to do this really early morning slot. I think it was 6 a.m. till, like, literally the contract probably said whenever Mikey turns up. And so Mikey would turn up sometime between 7 a.m. and at worst, like, 8:45.
Yeah.
Sometimes 9. But I had a situation where the producers for that show, whoever had schooled them, would not give me any content. So I had this thing where this ad with my full name on it was going out to air, and I knew, because I'd done really good radio in the past, that I was doing really lackluster early morning radio. And the other reason it was quite lackluster, I felt, was that BFM never said this, and I think it's a bit of an unhealthy thing to do. They brought me on to try and be a run for Mikey's money so that he'd go, oh shit, I better get it there early. Yeah. But what they didn't realise is I've got, what's the word? I'd like to say I did the right thing, in that I was like, well, it's like being a warm-up DJ or a warm-up stand-up comedian. I'm not going to go in there and start yahooing and trying to be the next Mikey when I need to respect that he's like, that's his spot.
It is.
And he's very fucking good at it when he's there. I mean, and then if I just got to finish this off. And then someone finally admitted to that on the phone. Like, I wish people had just said things in straightforward terms, which often doesn't happen again in those really pressured organisations. It was Chris Hockard, when I got him on the phone after the fact, when they'd got rid of me, that said, we brought you on to be a threat to Mikey, but it hasn't worked out. But I think I played it the right and civil and correct way.
You did. And
also, I'd been away from New Zealand for years and years and years. And my feeling is you need to intimately know a city and all the scenes and what's going on to even start to step into that role. And then lastly, Manu came along.
Lay it on the line.
I'll publicly say it on the record all these years later. He was just a jerk to me, that guy. He was like what they call John Key, a smiling assassin.
Yeah, I don't have much time for the man, to be totally honest about, like I say, I don't want this to be the platform for
Maybe I will have a beer.
Yeah.
Go on, give me a beer.
Yeah. The thing...
It was just sad to see the place was unhappy.
I feel where you're coming from, and I want to assure you, having been there with you at that time, that you didn't come under any of the discussions on how... Like, I was not privy to that. This is what Lewis does, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't
no, that's what I wasn't.
And I'm sorry that you felt that way, and I understand why you did. And like we've talked about, we just couldn't figure out how to tame the beast. And we both have had this discussion as well, that we love him dearly. He's an absolute monster of a talent, but no one has ever been able to do it, and no one will ever be able to do it. Is get him under control and playing within the lines, you know. So you were unfortunately probably got your knees scuffed because of that, and that's
okay.
unfortunate.
It was money coming in when I just.
But you did a wonderful job in what you did. I hope you know that.
It was money coming in just when I'd moved back to New Zealand.
You've always been a wonderful broadcaster, and you did your job fine. You know what I mean?
No, I knew that, but it is a lot when BFM's got a really good frequency and it's prime time, and you've got no content.
It was so hard for when I was in charge of figuring out what to do with that breakfast time slot. It's like I was so scared of what to do with it and how to because it's so important and so right that I didn't know what to do. You know, I did it for a while to think, well, that's the best I can do is me do it. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Actually, I remember you being. I have distinct memories of you being. I think the only person I remember giving me feedback on it, saying you're sounding really good this morning.
Well, that was what and I've had consequently, you know, if anything in my legacy can make me proud about that. And when I look back at that time of me being there, my ambition was dented because I was scared of fucking it up. But what I tried to do was encourage people all the time and mentor them because I felt like I was reasonably good at doing the broadcasting side of things, that I could hand on good information, and that's what it was about, was teaching people how to do it and being a platform for people to get better and move on to whatever else.
I'm going to break the fourth wall here. Folks, it's something just occurred to me. Jason wasn't my boss. Someone else was. Because you're saying this like you were in charge of me. You weren't.
But one of my roles was that support person to make DJs in whatever role they had up there give them feedback on good or bad things and for good or ill, you know. So I've had people come up to me in the street and say, I really appreciate the feedback, like you just said. Yeah. You gave me feedback in this way or whatever, and you were encouraging, and that's
why I came back to the
It's good to know that I did that, because that was my role.
I'm of a firm belief, because even my master's was kind of about this in a way. It was about the use of volunteers. Like any organisation that's got a whole lot of volunteers, again, that are really passionate about the thing, there's a lot of emotions and it's high stakes. And
I learn a lot
people who can manage people in that situation are really valuable, man.
I learn a lot about myself and how to deal with different people at that time, because I had no experience with it. But the same message had to be given, you know, 15 different ways to these different individuals because of the type of personalities they were, and I had no experience with that sort of thing. So, you know, I had to learn quickly and understand the dynamics of a large group of volunteer-type people to win, you know.
You basically said you're a rock guy. I mean, it says it all in your DJ name, right? Yeah. Jason Rockpig. The kind of like eureka moment with electronic music, how did that happen?
Well, it was a number of things. I am a rock guy. I always will be. That's the essence of who I am. But I've got a very broad palette and a very broad record collection, and always liked a lot of different things. But rock was what I was drawn to most, and heavy metal and all of that. But my first dance floor moment was at a blue light disco. I don't know whether you had those down in Wellington. Yeah, you did. Yeah. And the DJ dropped, and he dropped it several times that evening, because I think his repertoire was probably pretty limited, was Blue Mondays, New Order's Blue Monday. And I had my head in the bass bins as the breakdown kind of cascaded back into life, and the world had turned. But my mother had also basically got me into music. The radio had been on all the time. You know, American Top 40s is what it was in the CS, and you know, Rick Dees and all of that after that. But exactly that, you know, Casey Kasem's American Top 40. And but she had a reasonable record collection, and in it was Donna Summer, you know, so Giorgio Moroder and some of that disco stuff. I Feel Love, digga 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 digga. And as soon as I heard the old Moroder digga 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 digga, that's it, was it forever. So, but I swung back round to it after being in the BFM house and starting to go out with that crew, the slightly older alternative crew, and we started going to places like Squid in the Box and places like that, and that's where I fell in love with the dance floor, really, and we were dancing all night, not a care in the world, and all the things that go along with that, and it was just absolutely wonderful and experience. And I also fell in love with the concept of the DJ mix, you know?
Yeah.
And I was hearing people like, you know, Greg and the people that were playing down, Dean Webb and people like that were playing down at the box. But specifically what really turned me on and what I could see from the dance floor was Gideon and Chelsea playing back-to-back, Gideon Keith and Chelsea Warner.
Yeah.
And I met them and became really interested in that, and they kind of took me under their wing. Chelsea and another woman named Lady Mez, I don't know whether you've heard of her name, but she was playing around that time. Well, I got to go to Lady Mez's house and have a turn on the decks, which I'd never ever done before, and was a complete fuck up of an attempt at trying to get two records together, but I began to understand what was required to do it.
I had similar, except I didn't fuck it up at first. No, just kidding. Yeah. I had similar in that when I tried it first, I was like, "Oh, okay,
yeah,
I could spend a long time, you know, getting this right." You know? Yeah.
Well, I just dug into it after that, and was lucky enough to. You know, through BFM, I was getting early sets and through Michael, you know, at Squid when he was owned and run that place. I was doing early sets there, and I just learnt on the job, you know. I had no record boxes or anything like that. I'd take bloody shopping bags full of literally plastic shopping bags and cardboard boxes.
How are those? I was like, I never went to one, but I'd always liked the idea of the more broad BFM crowd and Unst. Like, were those Unst parties?
They were absolutely fantastic.
I seem to recall like there's this folklore of Mikey bringing out bagpipes and a kilt one year or something.
The marching band coming through the Mandalay in Newmarket was something that I'll never ever forget. But you know, I got to play those as well. You know, and
I know that's why I asked, because I saw you on the bills.
They were big room, old school big room experiences, and they just don't. I don't know.
I'll tell you what else was helpful around that time for me as well, because everything you've said to me, I'm like, tick, tick, tick. Locals, you know, seeing what locals are doing. It was really helpful, those really, you know, those American guys with a lot of mana and a lot of skills coming through. Like around that time, I saw Stacey Pullen come through. I saw Derek Carter come through. I saw Derek May come through. And like I already kind of knew what to do. But inevitably, all of us started doing all these new things we'd seen and heard over those nights.
All of those people that came through were so inspirational because they were masters. And to see Derek Carter 3-deck mixing, you know,
casually,
like
with a split thing in his mouth,
but understanding that stuff and just masters of it, and people like, for me, where my head was at sound wise was getting up and close and personal with people like Terry Francis, who was playing the sound that I loved, and watching absolute master Mark Farina, people like that. They were absolute masters of vinyl and mixer control. But there were people here locally doing it as well that were great inspirations. Roger Perry, the absolute king. Manuel Bundy, you know, an absolute master of that Swanee. Watching those people run a mixer was so inspirational and gave me a lot of tools to attempt to get better and so on, you know.
I wasn't going to go here, but did Swanee's death knock you around?
It did. It did for a number of reasons. I was already starting to settle down. I'd been settled down, but like it knocked me for 6 because I knew him personally and loved him. We weren't best friends by any means, but we had interacted a hell of a lot. He was in the
You're
crew.
In very similar tight circles, bro.
We were.
The same, sorry, the exact same tight circle.
We were together a lot and intimately, and that group at that time for me, I still call family, you know what I mean? Like they're just beautiful human beings, and he was an absolute stellar human being. So it was a shock, you know. And at his funeral, there was a lot of casualties, you know what I mean? I kind of looked at
Party casualties.
Yost and I sat in the car afterwards and just went, fuck, you know, and I, at that time, was so glad that I'd stepped away from, because basically when I became a driver and decided to have children with the woman that became my wife, Nina, I stepped away from drug use.
Yeah.
And that a lot of people of those in that time didn't, and they become casualties, you know. And consequently, some other people have died, including very close friends, because as a direct relation of that, have also had major mental problems and just problems in general because of it, you know.
Right.
And
Not to reduce it, bro, but kind of not knowing when the party ends.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
and you talk to these people that are still acquaintances or on the fringes of people you know, and they, I've got this problem and I can't do this, and you just think, when I stopped taking drugs habitually like that, and the reasons I've told you, I had to settle down. I wanted to be clean from the production of my children and becoming a driver. There's a drug policy with most companies of any sort of ilk, and I felt like that was the best thing to do anyway. And I was habitually taking drugs, so
you were. I often you're being very honest. Often I go as far as people want to go on this show. Was it slipping into like daytimes during the week as well?
It was all the time. Yeah, it was
really,
it
bro,
was
right.
Before we had our children and so on. And I want to make this clear: I'm not anti-drug, and I'm not a sober person. We're drinking right now. I still use alcohol and I still use caffeine and so on. And I miss marijuana like you wouldn't believe, but I just don't do it anymore because I don't. You know what I mean? I think marijuana is a wonderful drug that should be legal and so on, and as for harder drugs, there just needs to be a lot more education around it. And I'm not anti-drug. I love the feeling of ecstasy and all of that, to be completely honest. And my kids are probably going to hear this and go, please explain. But you know what I mean?
Here's what I've heard, and it's been alluded to a little bit. I've done a lot of these episodes now. I've heard that when I left New Zealand around 2000-ish, that come out with it, basically meth was kind of like an okay, acceptable thing to do for a period there. But it seems to be that is what has mowed a lot of people down.
It totally
are we getting into like the literals of it?
You're completely right. And it changed the scene, and it changed the dance floor.
Because everyone was taking very good ecstasy, which is
And I enjoyed it as well. And
it changed the sound. That's really a good observation.
It did. And
lots of lost sounding.
It's a very Moorish drug, but it also is a brain eater. You know what I mean? And a heart eater. And it just,
I know what you mean. And that's that thing of they say like old heroin addicts are almost like preserved and look really good, but because meth is so manufactured, it actually literally kind of eats away your physical.
I think amphetamines has always been like that. The Hell's Angels, back in the 60s and 70s and whatnot. It ate their brains too. But it just becomes a cycle of nothingness. And it becomes boring, or it gets you in the end, you know what I mean? And unfortunately that's the case for a lot of people we know,
or it gets to the point where it actually doesn't do anything to you.
It becomes boring, in the end I was doing it on my own, and I always was social with it and like to share and would be part of a group. And when you're kind of hiding away downstairs and trying to write a song with the same three chords for 6 hours in a row, it's beyond the beyond, Lewis.
You spent 7 hours on that loop, and then I got up and what the hell is this?
Nothing.
Sounds worse than when I started.
Yeah. So anyway, I stepped away from that, and it was the best. Immediately that I did that, my life took steps forward in ways that
we'll leave it there. But it sounds like that you luckily weren't. Some people are just so physiologically into it that it's not that simple. So
it's addictive, and it is what it is. You know what I mean? And you get caught in a trap, and then you think you need it to still be in the group or whatever. And I understand that the fun times come from it, and you don't want to let that go. Well, there is other things to be had that are fulfilling in a life that I found that were better than that, you know what I mean? And I guess I'd had the experience of it, and I was lucky, and whether I have any long-lasting effects from it, I don't know. I don't at the moment, but I was lucky to be able to step away from it and move on, you know what I mean?
That saying that comes to mind, it was good till it wasn't.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. And like I say, we're kind of bashed it to death, but...
No, that's right, I want to move on. I want to ask you about production, because, one thing is that it wasn't as easy to produce electronic music. I'm not making you sound like you from ancient Egypt or anything, but it's a lot easier.
Well, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know anything about it. I was working at Real Groovy, and I was DJing around the place and around the country and so on. And I thought, what's the next step here? I was deep in that life, and I was thinking, what's the next move? And it's like, well, I need to start making tunes. Yeah. I'd met Yost through Chelsea. This was about 99. It's one date I can...
But I need to stress that was pretty unusual back then compared to now.
Well, it was. Yost was starting to do it. He'd been making electronic stuff
Well,
with
Unitone
Unitone Hi-Fi
Hi-Fi,
and Nemesis subsystems and,
Yep.
and an early adopter of that stuff, and getting his head around all of that equipment and early computing systems and sampling and all of that. And I had met Joost in Caliber, I think it was, and I was working at Real Groovy and was thinking, how am I going to do it? I didn't even know where to start. And I saw him crossing the road. He lived around him and his wife lived in Grays Ave at the time, and I'd come out of Groovy for a cigarette break or whatever the fuck I was doing, and we were crossing the road at the same time, and I went, I want to talk to you. And he's like, I want to talk to you too, because he was looking for people to collaborate with in that way, mainly in a DJ sense. He wanted to hook up with DJs, and Joost has always been a good collaborator. He loves to work with people and help people out, and that's part of the wonderful human being that he is. I said, I want to start making tunes. He goes, well, I want people to, why don't you come over? So we immediately set a date to do that, and from that point on, we started making tunes, and he started teaching me how to do it, and also helped me out with a bit of equipment to start experimenting with
Which
it.
looked like what?
Well, it was an old Commodore computer or whatever.
An Amiga, with a sequencer.
And his setup was pretty rudimentary, but he had that and a sampler and so on, and some space echoes and stuff like that. And I had been collecting samples when I decided that that's what I thought was a good idea to do. Being at Groovy, I had the pick of spoken word samples and disco samples, and I'd amassed a bunch of disco 12s and interesting spoken word stuff, and I was listening all the time for potential sample bits, so I had a massive pile of that sort of stuff, so I was ready to go. And as soon as we got together, I just said, why don't we do this, why don't we do this, and he put it all together. He was a master programmer, and while he was teaching me how to do it, he was the master, and he had Subware already going. He was already making tunes under that name. The first thing we did, we called ourselves Smiler. It was a track called Fluffy, which ended up on a DJ 12-inch as well, which was just amazing to me. It was happening.
It's on Algorithm too.
Yeah, it is. It's on the first Algorithm. It's a great tune, and that's all just kind of ideas that I had that he put together and made happen, So from there, he said, well, why don't you become part of Subware? And we'll do this thing together. And from that point on, we just started rolling and making tunes together,
And where are we, like late 90s?
Yes, it will be, because I met in 99. So immediately we started amassing tunes. And he also, at that time, was getting involved with the COG guys. So that was starting to roll. That creative hub was beginning to bubble up.
So that Algorithm was the first, the label you were on. Was it Reliable?
Yes.
So that's the first. So that's the first house label in New Zealand.
I think Simon Gregg and that would have have an argument to say that, and rightly so.
The other point I was going to get to is that being ahead of your time is calling that compilation Algorithm, like the significance of that word now.
Yes, yeah.
It's just like it's extraordinary. That was that Chris.
I don't know. I don't know where that word Algorithm.
The other comp. This has occurred to you. The other comp that I saw that you were on from COG around that time was called ADSR.
ADSR.
Oh, was it ADSR?
Yeah.
It was ASMR.
Yeah.
I'm like, how did someone know
Attack,
about
delay,
that?
sustain, release.
Okay, there we go.
We did those parties too, which was another great set of parties that the COG people do. But he introduced me to those guys, and I became entrenched in that, and that leads on to the Sawcocks, because there was a young fella that had come across from Australia, Warwick Blake, who was doing part of the .com boom was happening, and he was doing programming type stuff. I'm probably fucking it up exactly what he was doing, but he was this guy making thousands of dollars a week, as far as I was rumored to be.
You sound like those. You meet those wives of really guys that have done well with coding and stuff. I don't know. He just does computer stuff.
But it was funny though, because he was he said he was intimidated me because I'd come up with Joost and covered in tattoos and skinhead or whatever, and he thought he didn't know what to think. But consequently it's come to light that they thought very highly of me, which is I feel very proud of. Yeah, and I was super excited to be in that, brought into that crew and that creative hub that was, and they did so much for me, and I love a lot of those guys still to this day. When it was great to be a part of that, but that's where I met Warwick, and we almost immediately became firm friends because he was doing visual stuff. Also, he had a program called the Plastic Toy, which worked visual images into to the music that was playing. So he would come on tour with us and do that, and we became fast friends, and consequently formed the Sawcocks after that, you know.
And they were, what'd you say, a blend? I loved it. It was a blend between Guns N' Roses and
Motorhead. Well, yeah,
did you get gigs?
We did. We played quite a lot. We put an album out.
What do you play? Guitar?
Rhythm guitar. Yeah, very.
And who was the singer?
Warwick was the singer, and the final lineup still is Andrew Manning, who you should talk to as well, who was host of
Mate, the hardest thing I have is lining up guests for this. If you can arrange that, he can sit here whenever he wants.
He's a major rager on the 4-string motherfucker. Bruce Ferguson, who's also a wonderful visual media person, and I'm not doing him any credit. And the drummer is Paul Hammond, who's now living in London, who also was in Raw Meat for the Balcony back in the day, a drummer of a heavy metal pedigree that is second to none.
That's Chris again as well.
Yes, yeah. So through that, and the Sawcocks kind of formed because Warwick and I became fast friends, and we would be out all the time watching bands, and we'd say, this is fucking shit. This is unexciting, lame rock and roll, and it's not doing anything for us.
Fucking awesome.
And it also started... The Sawcocks started as a lie. We began telling people we were in the band called the Sawcocks because we kind of looked the part. We were running the rock and roll, uniform or
so
whatever.
Like people who watch The Secret and go, visualise it and it will happen.
And it actually came out from an idea that if I put a billboard up with a message on it that people would believe it, like a subversive kind of media thing. And in the end, the record companies actually started ringing up Kyle going, what's happening with the Sawcocks? It wasn't even a real thing. But at that time...
When is this? Is this years ago?
Oh, this is 2000, early 2000. So anyway, we thought we'd better do something because we'd started telling this lie to so many people that we thought, well, why don't we do something? And we ended up using a lot of the broken equipment that was in the hallway of COG. There was bits of fucking broken shit lying around. I didn't even have a guitar at that stage. I ended up buying a guitar off Jim Halligan, who still does a show on BFM.
Yeah,
when I was working at Real Groovy. And we started bashing shit together, and it was fucking terrible. And we ended up taking some of those early demos up to BFM because we thought, well, let's just fly this flag and see if it waves. And we took it up to Dubhead, Patrick Waller, who was another big supporter of us. But the first thing he said to us was, this lacks talent and ideas. And he was so fucking right.
I like how honest he is.
But we got good because we...
That is such damning feedback.
We wrote some good songs. Warwick and I wrote some good songs, and coupled together with Andrew...
What did you say? This lacks talent and ideas.
Yes, and he was completely right, you know what I mean? And he was never going to broadcast those early...
That is like the
and if you heard those demos, you would think exactly the same thing. But consequently, we wrote a few good songs, and coupled together with Andrew, Bruce, and Paul, who was an absolutely outstanding drummer, they beat us into shape. My guitar style is very poor, very ham-fisted, and I've got a lot better. But
hey, look, it worked for the Sex Pistols, man.
Yeah, but very rudimentary, and I cover a lot up with distortion. And Warwick could sing pretty good, So, but we had spirit, you know what I mean. But we played a lot of gigs. In the end, we were playing quite a lot around town, and it was a rock and roll kind of heyday. Bands like the D4 and the Datsuns were really firing. There was a lot of good local bands, even though I just said we were seeing a lot of shit once. There was a lot of shit.
That's what I was thinking exactly when you said that. I was like, that I thought it would be around that rock and roll revival with like all the New York bands and all of that.
Well, it was.
It was just before that.
Well, it was in the mix of all of that. But we played some really good gigs, and we played some really shit gigs as well. But we ended up, and part of it was me being involved in BFM and that, but we supported Wolfmother before they became really famous, and we ended up supporting Nashville Pussy, and the last big gig we did was supporting Eagles of Death Metal at the St. James, and we were playing pretty well by then.
Say that, Dubhead.
Yeah, we were playing pretty well by then, but and what the Sawcocks was basically a rock and roll fantasy come true for us at the time, and we just lived that dream as much as we could, It was a lot of fun time band.
I talked to you off mic about how I don't even listen to a lot of music these days. I still love it. I still love DJing. But for a number of reasons, just what I do and don't do with my days has changed. But I was going to say, how do you scratch that creative itch these days? Do you kind of tutu around on music production software?
I've still got all the gear and all of that, and it's very much a part-time thing. And the Sawcocks has got some material that we had left over that we've beaten into shape. Paul still lives in London, so it's across the internet thing, and he's come back a couple of times, and we've recorded when we could. So we've got some material there. I muck around at home when I can. I play guitar most days, but it's very much a part-time thing. All of us have got family and businesses and proper jobs and so on. I'm super keen to do some stuff with Yost. He's super keen to still do it, and I've got some demos and he's got some demos, and we just really need to get it together and do it, and the intention is there, and I think we probably will do that.
I think, somewhere in our organisational text messages, you said something like, "Oh, actually, I can't do that day because I've got a full day of tattooing that I need to get done."
Yes,
and it occurred to me this morning, where are you putting them at this stage?
Well,
how does one spend a full day getting tattooed when everywhere I can see of you is, well, not
yeah.
your
Well,
head,
I started getting tattooed when I was 16. I started getting little bits and pieces here and there, and I met a guy when I was still at Best Bars that had a full Japanese style sleeve. His name was Kelly. He was a biker, and a guy named Brent McCowan had done that sleeve for him, and I'd always enjoyed that. There was a band called Rose Tattoo, an Australian band.
Angry Anderson, yeah.
Yeah, and they were all tattooed and had Japanese-style sleeve stuff, and I'd always been drawn to that full kind of bigger work. And so I've got a hold of Brent McCowan, and he did my first Japanese sleeve. He did some other work, and my intention was to keep going with him, but he disappeared to Austria and became a different person, and I didn't really know what to do, and I'd had a few other different bits and pieces done by different people, but I met a guy after the children were born. I got their names tattooed on my hands, and I went to a shop called Two Hands Tattoo, and a man named Thomas McMillan was working there, and he did that job, and he consequently...
Lucy?
Yeah, Lucy and Nico.
Nico, good.
Yeah,
good.
Lucinda and Nico.
Did you think about that when you did the four-letter names
Oh,
for
I
your
did.
kids?
Well, Lucinda it's actually her full name, but we call her Lucy. We call her different things. But Thomas was quite humble in the fact that he didn't announce that he was a specialist in Japanese tattooing by machine. There's the ancient... It's one of the... Japanese tattooing is like Māori tamoko, in that it's one of the oldest purveyors of that. And also Borneo was another place to do it, but Japan has got a rich.
Why is
ancient
modern
history.
Japan so down on tattoos then?
I don't know. It's just I've never really got to the bottom of it, and things are changing there slowly.
Yeah.
But it's because it's associated with the full style. Like I'll talk to you about. Was actually an ancient samurai thing, and it's a pictorial, like Māori art. It's a pictorial of where you've come from and who you are and so on. So samurais used to get it, and you would know where they were from and where they've been. And
It's
what
one of
what
those
they've
things
done.
I can picture, even though I don't know. Now you
Yeah.
mention it, I can picture
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so anyway, he did that, but he was very humble, because most tattooists tell you how cool they are and what they do and what they don't and how fucking excellent they are at everything, and you kind of go, oh, okay. But Thomas kept his mouth shut when I was talking about the history of my tattooing, and he knew Brent McCowan and so on. And I decided that I wanted to go further with a more heavier Japanese, fuller style on my body, and my research brought me back to Thomas. And I realised at that time that, and he didn't tell me that he did
guy,
that. Yeah,
right.
that's right. So I went back to him. I said, "Why the fuck didn't you tell me?" And that appealed to me a lot.
Yeah, I like that. I get why. Yeah.
So he did a few more bits and pieces on me. He did my other sleeve and so on. And then I decided, I got my tops of my thighs done, and after that I decided to get my back done, a full back piece done. And what is on my back is it's based on a 15th century print of from a guy called Yoshitoshi, and it's basically a priest acolyte battling Oni, who's the Japanese interpretation of the devil. Well, once I got my back done and my back nearly killed me, I thought I'd made a mistake.
How many sessions?
Oh, I've had hundreds of hours in it.
I saw the finished product on Insta this morning.
Yeah,
your guy must have posted it up a couple of years ago.
It's 40 odd hours in that and all, but.
Nearly killed you because of the pain?
It's just a very painful experience.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's because you can't see it, and the back is probably a more sensitive area.
But they say endorphins, like eating chilies?
Well, it always hurts, and it varies to different levels what day it is, you know what I mean? Some days hurt more than others. It always hurts. But after I got my back completed, and it was a very arduous task for me to do that, I decided, and I'd always looked at a full bodysuit as a potential, and it just became what I was looking at. The three things I look at on the internet are guys starting trucks that have been sitting for 20 years, people rebuilding muscle cars, and full body suits in a Japanese style. So I decided that I wanted to do that, and I okayed it with Nina. I said, what do you think about me getting a full Japanese style bodysuit in and around the stuff that stuff I have? So she said, well, that's fine if that's what you want to do. It's an expensive thing, so we have to allocate money that goes towards our life. And I undertook that journey. So I went and saw Tom. I said, this is what I want to do, and that's what we did. So my whole body is outlined. I've got a style called Soshun Buri, which is basically from the neck down.
Oh, I get it. The outlines are done, so we're getting to...
I'm just colouring in. So, long, winded story to get back to your question.
No, it's a great answer.
Yeah, it goes from my wrist.
Is that new on your calf?
It's all that's new there.
Yeah.
And that was last week's, and around my knees and down the side of my thing.
Oh, man, that looks amazing.
So I've got a style called Soshun Buri, which is complete full body, but...
That tiger's going to hurt when you fill it in.
Well, it like I say, it's... so I'm in the process of completing that.
When you first started getting tats, I'd imagine that it was still a bit radical in New Zealand.
It was.
Right?
It was.
People
still
don't even look at you twice now.
No, they don't. And it's people are, if people are less tattooed, that's more rare. You know what I mean?
I think from the little bit of travel I've done again in the last few years, I think New Zealanders are particularly tattooed.
We are. Yes, we are. It's a
yeah.
Pacific thing, and but it's becoming so widespread now. And you look at it in America, and funnily enough, there's a lot of young people getting their face and neck done, and I'm millimeters away from my neck tattoo showing, but I don't.
Well, the thing is, I mean,
like
obviously, you and I are pretty freaking liberal and whatever, but I'd go into a bank and see someone with a neck tattoo to me these days. I wouldn't blink twice.
Yeah, that's a.
But I don't know if you. I actually don't know if I've seen that, but it's amazing. It's amazing, kind of relative to other things, how quickly that's changed in our lifetime.
Yes,
because I reckon even.
I think there's going to be.
I reckon even 15 years ago, it was still 20 years ago, it was still fairly marginal.
It was at my I got my hands done pretty early on, and people would say, "You're never going to get a job with those." And I've never not had a job.
Well, you must know Dan the barber, right?
Yeah, all of that.
Getting your head and your face done's pretty.
I think there's going to be a lot of people. I've got one piece covered up that wasn't a bad piece. I just didn't like it anymore, and with the theme that I was heading to, I decided to obliterate that and absorb it into what we are doing now.
You had juicy on your lower back. Eh?
It was a classic 90s tribal piece, which was hot at the time during the 90s, and you'll know exactly what I mean. It was kind of
that's the other interesting thing of eras of either getting the I've been in Thailand tribal armband in the 90s or the Pamela Anderson razor wire.
Yeah, I don't know. Each to their own, but getting your neck and your face done, and I am so happy that I didn't get more things when I was younger and my brain was different that would have been upsetting to me today, or not upsetting, but I would have
you're right.
it,
and also,
I mean?
I think you were influenced by fashion and stuff back then as well, and it's sort of like, I think the analogy is like, everyone took their flares off after the 1970s, like, going to do, I think they look great, man, look amazing, and now I get what you're doing.
He's a very talented artist, and that's what you
and I'm guessing like everything in this modern world we live in, the technology's got way better, so it's a good time to be doing full body.
I wouldn't recommend it. And I decided to do this in the last 5 to 10 years. So I was over 40 when I decided to make that full commitment to a full bodysuit.
Some of those jail tats are melted down boot soles with a big biro and
But hygiene standards and all of that, the equipment standards and the artistry standards are so.
Well, I don't know how deep you are on tattoos in New Zealand, but and he actually probably doesn't tattoo in your exact style, but you'll still appreciate a great artist and great creativity. A buddy of mine I had on the podcast who I hadn't seen for many years, Simon Morse, who's in Wellington, does really great.
I know the name.
Go have a look at some of his work. Well, him and Marty Eamons used to do a lot of comic book stuff, and they used to do all the work for a lot of bands and stuff back in the day. What's that?
I hung out with Marty a bit.
Marty's a great guy. It was another tragic loss.
Yeah.
Mate, I think between this and the footage from the front line of the cab,
Is that enough, is it?
you
got enough?
fantastic.
Yeah.
I think so. It's been a great morning.
Dude, I love you.
Do you have any more beers in that?
I do, yeah.
I'd buy one of those containers. That's the coldest beer I've ever had.
Right. Well, you got to have them. There's the thing about beer, and if you don't know this already, let this be a lesson to you. Especially this brand here, people can't stand it, maybe, but it's got to be cold.
Look, mate, from everything you told me today, I think a Steinlager sounds perfect.
Thank you, Lewis. I love you, mate.
Yeah, take care.